Thank you so much for joining us on the High Performance Podcast. It's fair to say that Damien and I are both psyched and excited about this. And before I start, actually, if you're listening to this podcast, maybe now might be the perfect moment to just turn it off, go to YouTube and watch on YouTube, because behind Alan is all the people he's worked with. He's got like the coolest photos behind him. Maybe we should talk about those in a bit. But before we talk about those photos, let's go straight into the heart of the conversation. After the people you've worked with, the life you've lived, the successes that you've enjoyed, the failures that you've endured, what is high performance?
At its core, high performance is focusing on being the best that you're capable of as consistently as you're capable of. And I know there's two different lenses at which we can look through. You have some folks, Kobe Bryant being one that I certainly knew, whose goal was to be the best. And then you have another school of thought, which I actually ascribe to, which is simply being my best. And many times those things, they can coexist. But for me, high performance is about doing the best you're capable of as consistently as you can.
How important then in that list is consistency? Because it isn't cool, it isn't sexy, it isn't going to deliver instant results. But we believe on this podcast that if we can explain the power of consistency to people, we are doing a good service by them.
Oh, absolutely. I believe there's three ingredients to performing at a high level. You have to work hard, you have to work smart, but you have to do those two things consistently. And that's why consistent is kind of the third leg to that stool. And everybody's heard that you have to work hard. We've all been taught that since we were really little. And everybody knows that you need to work smart, that you're doing the right things in the right way. But if you do those two things, but you don't do them consistently, if you only do them when you feel like it or when it's convenient in your life, then you have very little chance of reaching high performance. So yeah, the consistency piece is undervalued and underrated when it should be the opposite.
But why though? Why is the consistency actually the secret sauce here?
Well, two thoughts come to mind. One, and I know some people do not agree with this belief, but I absolutely believe that how you do anything is how you do everything. So you need to consistently show up in every area of your life. The highest performers that I've been around, they didn't pick and choose when to be excellent or when to meet their standards. They did it in everything, So I know in my own life, I aim for high performance as a father. I aim for high performance as a speaker, as an author, as a business owner, as a friend, as a member of my community. It's not something that I aim to pick and choose. And then the second portion is I've always been a huge believer that the only way you get good at anything is through purposeful practice and repetition. Repetition is the oldest and most effective form of learning on the planet. And I don't think that's ever going to change. So the consistency comes into the fact that every single day presents us with opportunities to get in reps, to practice reps at whatever it is that we're trying to work at.
So can I jump in there, Alan, and ask you about one of those roles that you described, which is being a father? Because I saw the post that you'd put on Instagram about, we'll come back to non-negotiables in a while, but your non-negotiable rules for your kids were about being respectful, being honest. And the third one, which really jumped out for me, was taking ownership. Would you tell us a little bit about them?
Sure. Well, I try not to put myself in a box or confine myself with labels, but traditionally speaking, if you were to look at all of the hats that I wear, the one I'm most proudest of and take the most seriously is that of a father. I have 12-year-old twin sons and a 10-year-old daughter. I'm very amicably divorced, so I've also learned how to navigate divorce and co-parent effectively with my ex-wife, and we actually are pretty good friends to this day. But yeah, my ability to coach, to teach, to mentor, to pour into my own children is always number one on my priority list. And I'm a big believer that if my children can navigate life being respectful of themselves, respectful of others, respectful of the environment, if they can be honest and truthful and authentic and genuine, but I also want to teach them, as you just said, and I appreciate you highlighting that, to hold themselves accountable for every decision that they make. As the famous Navy SEAL Jocko Willink says, have an attitude of extreme ownership. And I teach my children that they do not control the vast majority of things that go on in the world, but they absolutely control their response to those things. And they always need to hold themselves accountable to whatever response they choose.
So how common are those same principles that you've seen in your world in elite sport and elite business?
That's one of my favorite parts about my work is that these principles and standards and routines and disciplines and mindsets have such high utility. We could actually have a shorter conversation if we talked about the differences between basketball and business, because most of those qualities transfer. Now, they don't transfer in the exact same way. There's certainly some nuances. But if anybody listening to this right now does not love basketball as much as I do, and maybe you've never even heard of Kevin Durant or Stephen Curry or Kobe Bryant, that's okay. You can still learn how to apply the same lessons that those guys have taught me. And that's ultimately what it's about. Anytime we read, watch, or listen to anything, especially a wonderful podcast like you guys have, we should find the principles and standards with the highest utility, and then figure out how we can apply those to our lives and in our specific situation.
So, you know what I'd like to do? You've mentioned 3 stunning names there: Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, and Kobe Bryant. Could we go through those 3 names? Would you be happy to share with us the single greatest bit of learning that they imparted on you? And then the 3 of us can just delve deep on those.
Absolutely. Well, I had a chance to meet Kobe Bryant back in 2007. Nike actually brought me out to Los Angeles to work the first ever Kobe Bryant Skills Academy. And I learned one of the most powerful lessons that I've ever learned in my life when I watched Kobe Bryant do a really early morning workout. And that is, the best never get bored with the basics. He looked me in the eye and he said that to me. I asked him, after watching him do some really basic footwork drills, I went up to him and said, Kobe, you're the best player in the world. Why are you doing such basic drills? And he smiled and winked, but he said in a very serious tone, I'm the best in the world because I don't get bored with the basics. And that was a life-changing moment for me, because in that moment, I realized that just because something is basic in principle doesn't mean that it's easy to execute. Just because something is simple in theory doesn't mean that it's actually easy to do. Many people often confuse basic and easy as being synonyms, and they use those words interchangeably, but they don't mean the same thing.
So make the distinction for us, Alan. Just give us a distinction between the 2 then.
The principles of high performance, what it takes to perform at your highest level in any area, are very basic principles. And I know they're basic for 2 reasons. One, I've been able to conceptually explain them to my own children, even when they were younger than they are now, and they completely understood and followed along. And I'm on stages all over the world sharing this information, and not once have I ever shared it and seen anyone in the audience's head explode because of mere confusion, like they couldn't follow. The stuff I'm sharing is so basic. However, and this is such an important disclaimer, it is not easy to do. If it was easy, everyone else would be doing it. If it was easy, the principles of high performance would be the norm. They wouldn't be the exception. And I'm also of the belief that we happen to live in a world, and it doesn't matter where on the globe you live, but society unconsciously tells us that it's okay to skip steps, tells us we should always be looking for a shortcut or a hack, and tells us we should constantly be chasing and in pursuit of what's new and what's shiny and what's flashy. And I'm a believer that doing those things is taking a step in the wrong direction. And that is because the basics work. They always have and they always will. And your mastery of the basic fundamentals and your commitment to them during the unseen hours is what ultimately determines how well you perform in any area of life.
So let me dive in here, if you don't mind, Damien, because this absolutely plays into what we believe on the podcast. We sell T-shirts on our store with world-class basics written on them. Now, where we differ, though, is that I actually think they are easy. What I think is that people don't know that world-class basics will get them to high performance. I think that people are walking around and almost, we say this quite often now, and like, have we called this podcast the wrong name? Because even my sister said to me the other day, she goes, yeah, but your podcast, high performance. I think that alienates people because not everyone can be high performance. And I'm like, no, Rachel, you don't understand. Everyone can be their own version of high performance. And all we're saying is be your own version of high performance. And there's an algorithm. And actually part of that algorithm is getting out of bed at a time which is half an hour before everyone else in the house, so you can center yourself and think about your day. It's, at the end of the day, reflecting on the things that you could have done better. It's having those difficult conversations that you don't really want to have but are really good for you to have. It's empathizing with people, taking responsibility for other people's actions and behaviors. And I don't know what you think, but I actually think they're easy. I just think people don't know that it's the basics that creates the high performance. Do you see what I mean?
I do. And I'm so glad you went in that direction. And I love your perspective and your connotation of that. I think what makes it challenging or less easy is this temptation unconsciously from society that keeps urging us to look past the basics. You know, everywhere we go, you log on to social media, you read any book or watch any video by a proclaimed guru, and they're always trying to sell you something other than the basics. And I do believe it is it's a human tendency to be allured by that temptation and want to skip the basics.
Because they can't make money from the basics. There's no money to be made. Like when we say this on the podcast, this doesn't earn us any money because, you know, we're not selling. Oh, hey, guess what? Buy the high performance mindset. But it's like, we're just saying like, do simple stuff well.
Absolutely. And I agree. And I think the other reason that, and I'm with you, you know, Jim Rohn used to say something to the effect of, you know, find a way to make it easy to do the things other people make it easy not to do. And I live by that. And I love that. And I'm with you. You know, the basic principles I live by, I live in such a flow and harmony in my life. These things are second nature and they're rather easy. But it also goes back to what we said in the beginning of this conversation about consistency and the ability to make investments every single day in your life towards doing these things. Using basketball as an example, and I know we'll get to stories about KD and Steph Curry, but at the time of this recording, you know, the NBA playoffs are going on. Steph Curry and the Golden State Warriors are doing really, really well. If I were to turn on the Warriors game tonight and watch Steph go crazy, he knocks down 12 threes, he scores 55 points, makes some unbelievable highlight moves. The average younger player wants to immediately go out to the court and emulate what they just saw Steph Curry do. The problem with that is they're skipping over, in his case, decades of practice that allowed him to be able to do it. They want to skip steps and jump right to his ability to dribble between his legs 3 times, shoot a fadeaway 3-pointer. What they don't understand is for the last 25 years of his life, he is committed to mastery of the basic fundamentals during the unseen hours. And he has progressively built upon that to the point that he can now make that shot. That's the other reason that I don't think people tend to believe that it's easy, because they want that outcome right now. They don't want to wait. I have to work on my game for 20 years every day and make millions of shots in order to do that. I don't want to do all of that. I just want to be able to make that shot now. And to me, that urgency and that, you know, feeling compelled to outcomes is what makes it, I guess, not as easy as you and I may think it can be.
So Alan, can you give it, so what you're saying is it's sort of sparking off so many light bulbs that in the course of the series that we've done, we've interviewed Sir Chris Hoy, who's like a British superhero cyclist there, that when we first met him, he turned up 10 minutes early for our interview and couldn't understand why. We were grateful that he showed up. It was like, just what to do. And we interviewed Glenn Hoddle, a former England national football coach, who spoke about the endless repetition of just passing the ball against the wall. So can you give us some examples of what these brilliant basics are that these high performers commit to, that anyone listening to this could go, well, I could do that. That's within my gift.
Absolutely. Well, I mentioned a moment ago that in 2007, I worked the first Kobe Bryant Skills Academy. What I didn't mention was Steph Curry was actually one of the college counselors there. Now, this was before Steph Curry became the Steph Curry that the rest of the world knows about. This is before he blew up at Davidson in the NCAA tournament. And he didn't have the physical stature or the resume of all of the other college counselors. He was kind of allowed to come to the camp because his dad played in the NBA and knew some folks. But we could all, as coaches, could tell immediately there was something really different about this kid. And it was palpable. And the most impressive of those traits was at the end of the first workout, he and I had not even been formally introduced, but he came over and he tapped on my shoulder and he said, "Coach, will you rebound for me? Because I don't leave the gym until I swish 5 free throws in a row." Now, for any of your listeners that have never shot a basketball themselves, let me just tell you, that is a very high standard. A swish, by definition, is the perfect shot. It doesn't touch the rim. It doesn't touch the backboard. It gets its name from the sound it makes by going nothing but net. This young man was not going to leave the gym after a grueling 2.5-hour workout until he made 5 perfect shots in a row, which means he could have swished 4 in a row, hit a little bit of the rim on the 5th one. It would still go in. He'd still be 5 for 5. He'd still be statistically perfect. but that wasn't good enough for him. He'd start over. And if memory serves, I don't think it ever took him longer than 12, maybe 15 minutes to swish 5 in a row. And it's my assertion that Stephen Curry will go down in history as the greatest shooter the game has ever seen. And I'm here to tell you all, it's not by luck. It's not by accident. It's not even because his dad played in the NBA. It's because he's willing to hold himself to an unparalleled standard. And while most of your listeners most likely don't need to swish 5 free throws in a row, what they can do is ask themselves, what are the fundamentals that I need to work for and work towards in my area of domain, my area of expertise or my vocation? And then what is the standard of excellence that I'm going to hold myself accountable to in order to reach that level? So in other words, everyone needs to figure out what are your 5 swishes in your line of work or whatever you're trying to perform at a high level of. And keep in mind too, that will slowly graduate over time. I'm pretty sure that when Stephen Curry was 8 years old, he didn't hold himself to the standard of 5 swishes. When he was that age, maybe he said, I won't leave the gym until I make 2. Or I will, then he gets a little older and better. Maybe I won't leave the gym until I make 3 in a row, and then maybe swish 3 in a row. So it's not like you don't need to come out of the gate with this unparalleled, almost unattainable standard.
Yeah. Yep.
You need to find for yourself what is an appropriate carrot to hold in front of your face, and then incrementally over time, continue to level that up.
Well, that leads us into the fascinating area then about goal setting, because what you're describing there is this ability to keep recalibrating as you get better. You set new targets and go after new horizons. Tell us about your experience of these high performers and how they go about doing that then.
Well, I'm a huge fan of the word recalibration. It's one that I use often in my own life. And I know this is a little bit of a cliche analogy, but it still is incredibly important. And that is using a GPS to navigate where you're trying to go, which for someone like me who is not very good with directions, I find very helpful. And there's 2 points that are required for the GPS. First and foremost, you have to know exactly where you are right now, or the GPS has to know where you are. The GPS doesn't care where you were last Tuesday, doesn't care where you were 10 minutes ago. The GPS only cares where you are right now. So that's akin to self-awareness. We need to know who and where we are in space right now at this moment. But then the GPS also needs to have an ending address. Where are you trying to get to? And you need to know that. That would be akin to having a goal or having a North Star. And once you have those 2 points, then it is going to give you the most efficient and effective way to get there. However, anyone who's followed GPS, especially on a longer car ride, will know that it will often reroute and change, especially if you make the wrong turn like I'm prone to do. If you get off on the wrong exit, it will basically say we have to reroute. So now we know where you are right now, and we still know where you're trying to go. We have to reroute, which is just another word for recalibrate. So it doesn't stick to that original prescription of directions. It changes as you change. And if you say, I need to stop and get some gas, then you pull off and get gas, and now it needs to slowly reroute and recalibrate once again. So I'm a huge believer in that. And as far as the high performers that I've been around, they understand the importance of having a North Star and a goal. But more importantly, they know that once they've established that, what's most important is the actual process, are the habits and the daily behaviors that will incrementally get them closer to that goal. So yes, a player like Kevin Durant's goal at the beginning of the season is to win an NBA championship, as is with most NBA players. But he already knows that's there. He doesn't have to keep looking at that North Star. What he needs to do is wake up every single day of his life and ask himself, what can I do today to get me and the Brooklyn Nets closer to an NBA championship? How can I make a maximum contribution to those around me? And how can I personally evolve and grow and develop to get me closer to that? And if he's willing to do that, and his teammates are willing to do that every single day, it gives them the best chance of actually reaching that North Star.
Which again takes us to the classic conversation of focusing on the process, not focusing on the outcome.
Absolutely. Which once again is very easy for us to say, but I have compassion for those that get blinded by outcomes. I understand people's needs to be so focused on results. But I've learned through my own firsthand experience in my life, as well as having been around all of these high performers, that the real juice is in the process. It's in the steps. And the example I love to use, because I just think it's so visceral, is building a brick wall. If you're tasked with building a brick wall, don't worry about the wall. Focus on laying each and every brick as perfectly and as carefully and as precisely as you can. And if you can stack each brick exactly where it needs to go, the wall will just take care of itself. You don't have to worry about it. And that's how I try and view any goal that I set, is once I've got it there, and I'm happy to have a North Star. I'm happy to have that ending address in the GPS. But then all I focus on is the daily behaviors, mindsets, routines, and rituals that will allow me to incrementally get closer to that. And then I just recalibrate along the way.
We were joined by Johnny Wilkinson on this podcast, who said to us that the thrill of winning the Rugby World Cup lasted for 30 seconds. Okay. He'd spent his whole life trying to achieve that goal. It lasted for 30 seconds. I think what people don't understand is that when they're focusing on the outcome rather than on the process, what they're effectively doing is they're delaying their happiness. So I will be happy. In his case, I'll be happy when I win a Rugby World Cup. Or to relate this to people listening to this, they'll be happy when they get the beautiful car or the bigger house or the child or the promotion or whatever it is. I think as soon as we can explain that that's just delaying happiness. And guess what? If you're going to delay your happiness until you get to that moment, you need to be absolutely sure that the view is worth the climb. Otherwise, you're going to be highly disappointed when you get there. And I'm sure in your experience, maybe personally, or certainly from the people you've worked with, they realize that actually the thrill of that title, the thrill of that trophy, the thrill of that championship, it's nothing like as exciting as it was in your mind.
Oh, absolutely. So glad you went in this direction. And that's why the key is learning how to actually love the climb, is learning to love the pursuit, is learning to love the work, because then you've already won in advance. See, I'm a huge believer that the outcomes and the results and the trophies and the championships and the bank accounts, those are a byproduct of diving into the process. Those are simply a cherry on top. And I know this has been a massive shift for me, because in full transparency, in my 20s and even for most of my 30s, it was the exact opposite. I was very outcome driven. My self-worth was tied to my achievement. And the problem with that is, if your self-worth is tied to your achievement, then that means when you achieve, you momentarily feel good about yourself. When you fall short of a goal, or you don't achieve, or you don't get the result you want, then you feel really lousy. And ultimately what you've created is a life where it's like a roller coaster, where you're going up and down. And I'm also a believer that if you're setting these North Stars and these goals appropriately, and you're setting them so they challenge you and they stretch you, you don't accomplish every one of them. I think I could make a pretty compelling argument that anyone listening, if you reach every one of your goals, then you didn't set high enough goals. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, I reach 50% of my goals. So 50% of the time I achieve and I get what I want, 50% of the time I don't. Well, according to my old construct and life philosophy, that meant half the time I felt good, half the time I felt really lousy. And to me, that's no way to live. Now I've shifted it around and said, yes, I've got targets that I'm aiming for, but I love the work. I actually love the writing. I love the work. I've already won in advance. And if I happen to reach one of these goals, that's great. That's just extra and that's bonus. If I happen to fall short, then I'll learn a lesson from that, recalibrate the goal, and go after it again. But either way, I've already won in advance. And learning to love the work and love the process and love the steps, to me, is incredibly liberating and empowering. And just let outcomes not be the destination, and definitely do not let them be the source of happiness, because it will leave you feeling very empty and very hollow.
So to build on that then, Alan, I think there's almost like, just quietly in the background of this is like the baseline of patience. And I think patience is something that we don't often talk about, the idea that you have to do this for a long time. So would you tell us about how we feel we could develop that patience to love the process, to eventually take us to where our North Star is guided?
Well, first and foremost, give yourself some grace and some compassion, and learn how to be kind to yourself. And I'm glad that you brought up patience, because it's one of the things that I'm continuing to work on. I feel like my genetic wiring for most of my life has been to be very impatient and want everything immediately. So this has taken some unlearning and then relearning and reconditioning myself to learn how to be more patient. And with that, I also want to make the disclaimer that everything that I'm sharing with you all, I'm not speaking from a place of mastery. These are all things that I still struggle with, I still find challenging, but I like the progress that I'm making. And one of the things that I threw out years ago was this concept of perfection. I don't allow myself to get stifled by perfection because I don't actually believe in perfection. I know as a human being, I'm flawed. I'm going to make plenty of mistakes. I'm going to exercise poor judgment. Those things are going to happen. Can I learn from those and be motivated and inspired by making progress? Am I further along today than I was yesterday? And will I be further along a year from now than I am today? That's what really inspires me. And in order to have that mindset, you need to develop patience. And so with patience, I'm not anywhere as patient as I'm capable of, nor am I as patient as I hope to be at some point. But I'm definitely more patient than I was a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And it simply takes practice, but it also takes awareness. You will never improve something you're unaware of. You will never fix something you're oblivious to. So the very first step to improving patience is having the awareness to recognize when you're being impatient, is to recognize when you're starting to unconsciously skip steps or look for shortcuts, or when you're unconsciously just drawn to the outcomes instead of the process. And that's the stage I'm at now. I still have a natural inclination to be very impatient towards things, to chase, to hunt down, and to almost have an aggressive mindset. But I'm now at a point where I catch myself doing those things rather quickly, and I can take a deep breath and I can have a very pleasant conversation with myself, improve my self-talk to remind myself that, I need to be more patient, that things take time, that it took me almost 20 years to build up credibility in the basketball training space. And then when I left that to become a corporate keynote speaker, I had to remind myself that it was going to take time to do the same, that I wasn't going to leap into a new industry and a new vocation and just snap my fingers and all of a sudden, be world class at it. It was going to take time, just like it did the first time around. And shifting that perspective gave me the patience that it needed to continue to build this. And while I'm proud of what I've done over the last 5 years, I haven't even come close to scratching the surface of where it is that I'm headed. And I know that's going to be a lifelong pursuit. I don't think I'll ever be a completed work. You'll never put me under museum glass. I will be a work in progress for the rest of my life. And I'm actually thankful for that, because to me, that's the fun part.
Hey, we all are a work in progress. I love what you said as well about perfection. People get tied up and knotted up about being perfect, only to realize that their idea of perfection is different to someone else's idea of perfection anyway. There's something you mentioned there that I can't allow you to mention and move on from, which is self-talk. And I'm really aware that on this podcast, we are talking about things that for some people will feel like they're applying pressure. There will be people listening to this conversation thinking, I've got to do better. I've got to be more like Alan. I've got to be wiser like Damien. I need to sort things out. Actually, what they often need to do is be kind to themselves, because that is where the magic lies. I would love some really, really salient and clear tips for people on how to improve the self-talk that you could share with them to help improve their lives.
Most of the high performers that I've had a chance to get to know and be around are very critical of themselves. They hold themselves oftentimes to an unachievable standard. And when they fall short of that, they pile on with shame and guilt and beat themselves up. So one of the best things that high performers can do, as you just said so beautifully and brilliantly, is to learn to be kind to themselves, to give themselves some grace and some compassion. Now, this doesn't mean go easy on yourself. You can still hold yourself to a really high standard, but you can do so with love and grace. Like, I hold my children, who I love more than anything in this world, to an incredibly high standard, but I do so in a loving way. And the best advice that I can give, and I've used this in my own life, and I hope your listeners find it helpful to apply, is practice speaking to yourself the way you would speak to a loved one. Jake, if you called me up after a tough day and said, hey, Alan, I had a really rough day today. I had a podcast interview this morning and I completely botched it. We forgot to hit record and I got halfway through. And then I had this proposal that I submitted and it got denied because I had some errors in it. And I got in an argument with my significant other. It was just really, really a tough day. If you came to me with that as your friend, the very first thing I would do would be to extend a hand with empathy and compassion and say, Jake, man, I know what it's like to have a tough day. I'm sorry that you went through this, but I know you're strong enough to get past this. I know you're going to learn some lessons from this. I know that just because you had a bad day today doesn't mean you'll have a bad day tomorrow. You got this, buddy, because I believe in you and I care about you and I've got your back. That is how I would approach you as a friend. And that's how we need to talk to ourselves. So when I make mistakes and, at the time of this recording, it's just a little bit after lunchtime, East Coast time here in the States, I probably made 10 mistakes already today. And that's okay. That's on par. That's, like I said, I don't worry about perfection, but what I've learned to do is forgive myself, be kind to myself, learn from these mishaps, and then quickly move to the next play. I'm a big next play guy. And I think if we can learn to talk to ourselves the same way we would talk to a loved one, especially children, any parents listening to this, if your child comes to you and they're upset or they're scared or they're worried or they're anxious, you don't belittle them. You don't demean them. You don't make fun of them. You bring them in and you embrace them and you show them warmth and comfort and love. And that's what we need to do to ourselves. And this is another area that I've had to do some immense self-work. And I've gotten much better at that over these last few years because I used to be very critical of myself. And I'm trying now to give myself some grace.
So the way you describe that relationship there and that kind of language and conversation leads us into the area of culture. So you've been in the locker rooms of these high-performing environments. And I'm interested in how leaders within those environments create that culture of psychological safety, compassion, empathy, and understanding that is the building blocks of high performance. Would you give us some insights into that, Al?
Be happy to. Culture is one of my favorite things to talk about. And I know that it's somewhat of a buzzword. People talk all the time about culture and they never really define it. I'm a believer that your culture is how well aligned your beliefs and your behaviors are. So you have your beliefs. These are your core values. This is your vision. This is your mission. This is what you're telling everybody that you want the team to be. But then that has to mirror the daily behaviors, the mindsets, the attitudes, the habits, the way your team shows up. Because if those things aren't congruent, if I'm telling you that these are our team's core values, and then you see me behave differently, you see me behave in construct to that or dysfunction to that, then we've got a problem. So culture is how well you align beliefs and behaviors. So in order to do that, first and foremost, you have to have clarity on what it is that you believe. Let's just say as a business organization, what do we stand for? What do we believe in? What is our mission? What is our vision? What are our non-negotiable core values? Who do we serve? What problem do we solve? You have to get crystal clear on all of those, because if you're ambiguous in those, that's going to fog the clarity of being able to create that culture. So on one hand, you have to be crystal clear on those things. Then on the other hand, you need to hold everyone, starting with yourself as the leader, to a high standard of accountability in living those things out.
So can you describe a culture that you've been into then that does come closest to those standards?
Absolutely. I'll give you one in the sports world, and then I'll give you one in the business world. One in the sports world. So I was fortunate to work for 6 years as the performance coach at DeMatha Catholic High School, a private high school here right outside of Washington, D.C., that has over a dozen players currently playing in the NBA. DeMatha is one of the top 10 high school boys basketball programs in the United States. And, for reference, there are over 30,000 boys varsity high school basketball programs in the United States, and DeMatha's regularly in the top 10. Victor Oladipo, Quinn Cook, Markelle Fultz, a whole host of players. And the culture that Mike Jones, who was the coach then, he's not the coach at present, that I worked for, did a unbelievable job at building that DeMatha culture. He modeled the behavior that he wanted to see from the rest of the team. This was never leading from an ivory tower, saying, do as I say, not as I do. He led by example, and he held everyone to a very high standard. Every single person in the DeMatha program, managers, assistant coaches, athletic trainers, and of course the players themselves, they knew exactly what the standard of excellence were. They knew what their role was on the team. They knew what they needed to do to make a maximum contribution. And they knew the expected level that they were to do it. And Coach Jones did a beautiful job of not only coaching the team as a whole, but also getting to know each and every individual and coaching them individually as well. So from a sports standpoint,
what were the behaviors then? So when you said about these non-negotiables in that example there at DeMatha, what were the behaviors that everybody was clear about?
Well, interesting enough, and this is why he's had such a profound impact on my life, they were very congruent with the behaviors we talked about earlier that I hold my own children to. The number one rule at DeMatha was to be respectful. Be respectful of your school. Be respectful of your teachers. Be respectful of the actual physical campus and the building. Be respectful of the environment. Be respectful of your teammates. Be respectful of the game of basketball. Be respectful of the fact that players have played here long before you, that have built the foundation and given this program the credibility that you're now allowed to enjoy. DeMatha was one of Nike's elite programs, which meant even at the high school level, we would get the same shoes and gear as many of the top top college and professional teams would get. And Coach Jones would remind the players and say, I hope you guys know, and he would say this with a huge smile, you haven't earned the right to wear Nike. The players before you earned the right for you to wear Nike. Now it's your job to uphold that so that the players coming after you can continue to wear Nike. So he wanted to make sure they understood where they fit in the big picture. But it absolutely started with respect. Then it also started with honesty and being truthful, which, Coach Jones would say, if I ask you a question, I want you to be honest with me. Even if you don't want to say what you need to say, and even if you don't think I want to hear, the truth is a form of love. When you care about someone or you care about something, you tell them the truth and you speak honestly. And, he was a big believer that confrontation, which I know gets a bad rap, confrontation simply means meeting the truth head on. That we're going to, if we have an issue on the team, on or off the court, we're going to care enough about each other to confront that behavior with the truth. And we're going to find a way to help reconcile that. And then, of course, the attitude of extreme ownership. So many of the principles that I learned from him are what I use now to parent my own children. And certainly there were more, role clarity. It's so important for everybody on the team, whether you're the star player who's got future NBA potential, or you're the 15th man that doesn't play very often in games. Those are very different roles, but each of those players needs to know their role, embrace their role, and star in their role to the best of their ability if we want this team to be successful. So he was a big advocate of we over me, that we're going to do what's best for the team, for the program, and for the school, not just what's best for you. And that is a really hard sell to 15 and 16-year-old alpha males that have dreams of playing in the NBA, because understandably, they're inherently selfish. They want more minutes. They want more shots. They want to score more points. They want to be in the headlines in the papers the next day. But if those things aren't in alignment with what's good for DeMatha basketball, then we're going to have a problem. And, he would say things like, it doesn't matter who scores. It just matters that we score. So be happy when your teammate scores a basket because you're wearing the same color jersey that they are. So, and I could go on and on. We could do an entire podcast series about how brilliant Mike Jones and the DeMatha basketball culture was.
Oh, that's illuminating, though. Thank you. Thanks, Alan.
And now a business example.
Yeah, one of the business examples, I haven't had a chance to work with this organization directly, but I did have a chance to spend time with one of their executives, and it's DHL, the International Shipping and Logistics Goliath. I know here in the United States, FedEx and UPS tend to dominate the very small market here in the US, but on a global level, DHL is an absolute Goliath, and they have a presence in every single country in the world. And they have a team with hundreds of thousands of team members. So, you go from DeMatha, which has 15 players, 5 coaches, and a couple of managers, over to DHL that has hundreds of thousands. And so their ability to scale their culture is remarkable. And I'll tell this one kind of quick story. What they believe is most important is making sure that every member of the team stays directly connected to their purpose. And at DHL, they say, our purpose is not to ship brown boxes. Our purpose is to deliver promises. We promised you we would get you this box on this date, and we believe in sticking to that promise. And one of the ways they would do that is they would collect client testimonials, customer testimonials of people that were very appreciative of receiving a package. And they would make compilation videos and they would show those to members of their team. So they would let the person know that's working at 2 a.m. In a very rural country, in a rural town, and they're working in the warehouse. And their job is literally just to put brown box after brown box onto each and every truck. They let those folks know you are not putting a brown box on a truck. You're putting a little kid's birthday gift on a truck. You're putting a future bride's wedding dress on a truck. You are not just putting a brown box on a truck. You are actually fulfilling a promise that could change someone's life. And when they did that to that degree, then the person that was doing that work had more buy-in and believe in. The person that was putting that brown box on the truck had more pride in their work. They took more care in their work because it meant something. And, that gives me goosebumps even telling that story, because that's how important that is. And they would make, maybe they'd show a testimonial of a bride with tears of joy in her eyes saying, "Thank you so much, DHL, for making sure I got my dress on time." And they would show that video to the person that puts those boxes on there. So when they show up for work, they know I am valued, my work matters, and I am making a contribution to other people's lives. Because it would be so easy to relegate their job to, I just put boxes on a truck. Oh, well, I'm not that important. And they want you to know you are absolutely that important. You are changing people's lives. And that's just one example of their culture.
Yeah, I'm not sure which delivery company it is that I also read once that trained their delivery drivers in speed walking, so that they get them to imagine that somebody's looking behind the curtains, and you have to make it look as if you're rushing to get that delivery there as quickly as possible. That correlates to that. But I love it. I love that golden thread that runs all the way through it.
Let's talk then about what inspires you in the workplace, Alan. In Sustain Your Game, you said before every show, I repeat these words to myself: poise, presence, personality, preparation. Can you give us a sentence on each of those four and why you chose those four words?
One of my core beliefs in life is that a candle loses nothing by lighting another candle. And obviously you guys live that out. This show is the epitome of lighting other people's candles and knowing that it doesn't.
I'm writing that one down, by the way.
Oh, please.
In fact, I'm putting it on my Instagram right now.
And it's not an Alan Stein Jr. original. I don't know who said that first. It was told to me secondhand a few different times. So I've conveniently borrowed it. So you're more than welcome to borrow it for me.
Thanks, brother.
It's the epitome of what we're talking about. And it's this idea that if I learn something new, which I have learned listening to your guys' show, I want to be a steward to pay that forward in service of other people. I don't want to be selfish and hold on to that. I want to fill other people's buckets. So at my core, my number one job is to light other people's candles, to fill their buckets, and to be of service. And that's ultimately what I remind myself every time I step on stage is I'm about to step on stage. This is not about me. This is not about sharing what I want to share. This is about sharing what I believe will be most helpful and most in service of the people in this audience. And the only way that I know that is by doing my due diligence and my preparation in advance. I like to say it, and this is something else that I had mentored to me, making preparation my separation. One of the things that I believe makes me a fairly decent keynote speaker is I leave no stone unturned when it comes to doing my due diligence and learning everything I can about the company or the event or the audience so that I can hyper customize that message to them. And once I take the stage, then if I've done my work, I'm fully prepared and I'm in there, mind, body, and spirit, simply to be of service, then I can just be present and enjoy the moment. I don't have to worry, did I memorize everything to the letter? I don't have to worry, am I standing in the exact spot on the stage and am I using perfect hand techniques and body? I don't worry about any of that. I just worry about being me, being truthful, and sharing everything I can to help the audience. And that little mantra that I say to myself in advance just reminds me that's why I'm there. And the poise part comes in that I know every time I take the stage, something can happen. Somebody's phone can ring. A waiter can drop a glass. The fire alarm could go off. The power could go out. Anything could happen. And when those things happen, just smile, understand they're a part of this thing we call life. Deal with it, address it, and then move to the next play. And don't get frazzled or rattled. And knowing that in advance puts me at a sense of calm and peace. So when I take the stage, I can just be me and I can just focus on sharing.
So tell us then about your relationship with failure, because the lights do go out, the phone does ring, things do go wrong. How do you process that and move on from it quickly?
One, if I'm in the present moment and I'm not bringing baggage from the past and I'm not anxious about what may or what may not happen in the future, I can just be present. then I'm able to handle those things as they come. So there's a difference between having the forethought to prepare if those things happen, what will I do, versus worrying about them happening. I don't spend 1 second worrying that any of that stuff's going to happen. I just have a contingency plan that if the power goes out, here's how I'll handle it. If somebody's phone rings, which happens all the time, here's what I'll do. And I don't view them, I detach any type of negative connotation to them. And this is another kind of macro worldview that I have. I work really hard not to look at the world through the lens of right and wrong, good and bad, positive and negative. I just look at everything that happens as completely sterile. It's completely neutral. It has any type of value when I associate an emotion to it. So if you guys were in the audience, if I were to come over the pond and give a keynote and you guys were in the audience and Jake's phone goes off, I don't equate that to being bad or wrong. It's certainly not going to be anything that gets me upset. The phone just goes off. That's actually the conclusion of what happens when someone dials his number and his ringer is on. That's physics. Nothing else is even possible. So I don't get upset over that. I just say this thing happened and here's how I can address it. And that gives me the ability to be agile and nimble enough to just go with the flow and not grip so tightly onto something or get so bent out of shape when things don't go my way. I recognize that a lot of the things that happen in this world are not to my liking and they're not my preference. That if someone gave me the magical ability to control the universe, there are plenty of things that I would have unfold differently, but that's not the case. And it never will be the case. So I just let the world unfold and then I just respond or react to it. And normally you'll actually improve the connection with the audience and the respect from the audience when you don't let something like a phone ring knock you off your game. You just simply say, if you want to make a joke, if that's your personality, that's great, whatever it may be. But people actually appreciate the fact that you're nimble enough to go with the flow. And one other quote that I love, and this again is not an Alan Stein Jr. original, but Jake, you can write this one down. If you're not agile, you're fragile. And that's true even from an emotional standpoint. So I would say that if you're a keynote speaker and a phone ringing is enough to throw you off your game, you've still got some work to do.
Can I take you back to the first part of that answer then? I do love that phrase. If you're not agile, you're fragile. You spoke about that you will invest some time almost pre-planning for what could go wrong. So the brilliant psychologist Gary Klein talks about them as premortems. You work out what could kill you, how can I handle it? And then you move on and prepare for it. Could you tell us a little bit about premortems and how you use them and how other high performers that you've worked with have done?
Yeah, I just consider that part of my preparation, is just saying, what could potentially get in the way of me serving this audience to my best ability? Well, if the phone rings and it throws me off my game and I forget what I was talking about, or I get visibly flustered, or I get angry, that actually is going to detract from my ultimate goal, which is to serve the audience. And I don't want that to happen. So if the phone rings, what's a way that I can handle it that allows me to stay in rhythm and stay in flow? Same thing. Now, obviously, there's a spectrum of things that could happen. A phone ringing one time, not that big a deal. The fire alarm going off incessantly to the point that everyone actually has to evacuate the building, and then you have to come back 30 minutes later and continue your presentation. That's obviously a bigger disruption, but nevertheless, I'm prepared for those things if they happen. It's no different in any scenario in life. Is figure out what could ultimately prevent me from accomplishing my goal or performing at my best, and let's address it ahead of the time. I learned this lesson, once again, I'll keep going back to Coach Mike Jones at DeMatha Catholic High School. The last thing Coach Jones would do, so he would scout our opponent. He would study, their tendencies. He would study the plays they run. He would know their personnel. During our practices leading up to the game, we would practice what we plan to run, but we would also show our players what they are going to run. He'd watch film on them. Like, he was relentless in preparation. And the very last thing he would do is he would ask the coaching staff. He would say, this would be the night before the game. He'd say, now, I feel good about what we've prepared to do. I feel good about our team. I feel confident going into tomorrow's game. I believe we're going to win. However, if we were to lose, why would we lose? each of you, and he would say this to the assistant coaches, give me the number one reason you think we would lose tomorrow. Is it because we got out rebounded? Is it because we didn't handle their full court pressure? Is it because just give me the reason you think we may lose? And he would collect that information, and then he would plug those holes in advance. He would say, if you're telling me, coach, that we're going to lose tomorrow because we got out rebounded, we will not let that happen. We're going to emphasize rebounding even more during tomorrow's shoot around. So if we do lose tomorrow, it's not going to be for the reasons that we've already agreed upon are the reasons we will lose. I mean, it's so simple, but so brilliant. So he would do that in advance. And most of the time, and keep in mind, at a school like DeMatha, we didn't lose very often. You know, a typical season, we would win 35 games, lose maybe 3 or 4 games. So it doesn't happen often. But then he would do the same thing on the post side. He would say, okay, we lost tonight. Why did we lose? Was it because the other team was simply better than us? Was it because we didn't play hard enough? Was it because we took bad shots? Was it because we were insufficiently prepared? We need to assign a reason to why we lost. And then we need to make sure we do not repeat that mistake again moving forward. So if we lost tonight because we took bad shots, we are not going to let that happen again. That will be a focal point and an emphasis for us moving forward. So he would look on either side of that. He would preemptively decide why we could lose, plug those holes. In the rare occurrence that we did lose, he'd reverse engineer and figure out why and make sure we didn't do that again.
Nice. Obviously, I think he's now a youth coach, isn't he, with the US basketball team? Yeah,
he is, and he moved up to the college ranks, so he's the associate head coach at Virginia Tech University, and he is a very valued member of USA Basketball.
Right, Alan. Our quick fire questions. Your 3 non-negotiables for living a high performance life.
I'm going to stick with the 3 that I use for my parents. Be respectful of everyone and everything around you. Be truthful and honest, but most importantly, to yourself, and hold yourself to the highest level of accountability and extreme ownership.
How important is legacy to you?
As a father, it's incredibly important. I'm not as concerned with my legacy to the greater world around me, but my legacy with my children. And I want my children to know how much I love them unconditionally, and that even with all of my flaws, I'm doing the best I can. Or I guess if it's legacy, I'm speaking in the past tense. I did the very best I was capable of to pour into them and to set them up to have happy, fulfilling, high-performing lives. So what's most important to me are the people that are closest to me. And in my life, that's definitely my 3 children.
Lovely.
What advice would you give to a teenage Alan just starting out on his journey?
I would refer to the advice that I just gave with you guys, which is, if you're a teenager, start to figure out what you love, be exploratory and trying as many different things as you can and figure out what sticks. Try sports, try arts, try music, try theater, try stuff, involved in computers or graphic design or coding and gaming. Try everything you can and find out which things you really love the most and which things fill your bucket. And then try to align those with the natural gifts that you have. That every person listening to this has a natural gift, has a natural talent, and figure out what that is, get clarity on it, and harness it for your own benefit, and then find where those things intersect. But keep in mind, and I'm living proof of this, that point of intersection will change over time. For a third of my life, that intersection for me was as a basketball player. Basketball was my favorite sport. I was a pretty good player. That was my intersection. Once I realized that it wasn't in the cards for me to play professionally, that point of intersection moved. I still love the game of basketball, but I decided to get into coaching and be a performance coach. I had a natural inclination for communicating and teaching. So that's where it shifted. And then 5 years ago, it shifted again to being a keynote speaker. But it still met the 2 primary ingredients, something I loved and something that I had, a talent for, I guess. And that may change again over these next few years. Who knows? But as we get older, we start to develop new passions and we develop new skill sets. So we don't have to stay static, and we don't have to sign a lifetime contract to whatever it was we figured out in our 20s.
Have you heard of the Japanese word ikigai?
I sure have. Absolutely. Love that principle.
It's brilliant, isn't it? And for people that listen to this and don't know, it's finding the thing that you're good at, that you enjoy, that the world needs, and that you can earn money from. Once you find your ikigai, then you're happy. And I suspect that Alan has done exactly that. Next quick fire question. You can't say raise your game or sustain your game. because they're both brilliant, but that's too easy. I'd love you to give me one book that the high performance audience should read.
It's most likely one that they've already read because over 5 million people have read it. But I would say Atomic Habits by James Clear is an absolute must read. I've read it twice and I've listened to the audiobook.
And the final question then, Alan, that we ask all our guests is, could you offer us one golden rule for our listeners to live a high performance life?
Get clarity on the person that you strive to become. So for me, and I'll use this as a first person example, I'm 46 years old. I'm crystal clear on the man that I want to be 20 years from now, the 66-year-old Alan. I want the 66-year-old Alan to be physically, mentally, and emotionally fit. I want the 66-year-old Alan to be doing work he considers meaningful and in service of others. I want the 66-year-old Alan to have deep, strong connections with family and friends and the people that mean the most to him. So that's the man that I would love to be 20 years from now. So right now in present day and in present moment, every single decision I make in my life, I try to make in alignment with becoming that person. Whether it's who I follow on Instagram, what I'm going to watch on Netflix, or whose show I decide to come and be a part of, I ask myself, is this going to take me closer to being that person, or is it going to take me further away? And then every single day, I try to make as many decisions as I can that put me in alignment with becoming that person. Now, the beautiful part of that is by doing that, I'm designing my future in the present. So this is not about delaying happiness or waiting until I'm 66 to enjoy the fruits of life. I'm making those decisions today, which means today, the present 46-year-old Alan is physically, mentally, and emotionally fit. He is doing work he considers meaningful and in service of others, and he has a wonderful connected relationship with the most important people in his life. So even though that's my North Star, I'm living it presently. But the only way I can guarantee that that's who I'll be 20 years from now, assuming I live that long, is by making these decisions. And the litmus test that I use, and this will be the last thought for your listeners, and hopefully puts a big red bow tie on everything we've talked about, which has been a really lovely discussion. Every night before I go to bed, I ask myself this question. I say, Alan, you just traded 24 hours of your life for the progress that you made today. Are you happy with that trade? And if my answer is yes, I get a very peaceful night's sleep. If my answer is no, I give myself some grace and some forgiveness, and I still get a peaceful night's sleep because I know today is always over tomorrow, and I got another at bat in the morning.
What a brilliant, brilliant way to finish. Alan, thank you so much for taking the time, for the books you've written, for the things you've learned from other people. And I think there's two really key things here that I'll take away from this conversation. And the first one is living that life open eyes, open mind, open empathy, open understanding, learning from everyone you meet. And then I think the second one, which is more important than that, is that desire, that drive, which is clearly deep within you, to pass it on, not just to your kids, but to pass it on to the thousands and thousands of people that read the books and hear conversations like this. So thank you very much. And, you know, people like you make the world a better place, and there's very little more we can do in life than that. So thank you so much, man.
Thank you,
That feeling
Alan.
is so mutual. I appreciate you guys immensely. This was awesome.
Please hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, give us a thumbs up, leave a review, but somehow get involved with the High Performance Podcast and become part of our growing community. Thanks for being part of the adventure.